Good day, everyone. Today, I will be discussing Kant's categorical imperative and how it applies to the ethical issue of falsifying information at work. Workplace dishonesty is a serious issue that can involve manipulating financial reports, hiding company losses, or misleading stakeholders for personal or corporate benefit. In this presentation, I will explain Kant's three formulations of the categorical imperative and evaluate why falsifying information is morally wrong from a Kantian perspective. I will also compare Kantian ethics with utilitarianism and use real-world examples like the Satyam scandal and the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol crisis to demonstrate how ethical decision-making affects organizations and society. This presentation is divided into several sections. First, I will briefly explain Kantian deontology and the idea of the categorical imperative. Then, I will define falsifying information at work and discuss why it is ethically significant. After that, I will evaluate the issue through Kant's three formulations: universal law, humanity as an end, and the kingdom of ends. I will also compare Kant's theory with utilitarianism to highlight the differences between duty based and consequence based ethics. Finally, I will conclude with key lessons about honesty, trust, and ethical workplace culture. Immanuel Kant believed that morality is grounded in duty and reason rather than emotions, self interest, or consequences. According to Kant, people should do the right thing simply because it is morally right, not because they expect rewards or fear punishment. Cranach, 2019. Kant introduced the categorical imperative as the central principle of morality. The first formulation asks whether an action could become a universal law for everyone. The second formulation says we must treat people as ends in themselves and never merely as tools. The third formulation asks us to act as members of a moral community where everyone follows shared ethical principles. These ideas are important because Kant believed morality should apply equally to all rational people. Honesty, therefore, is not optional, but a universal moral duty. Falsifying information at work refers to intentionally providing false or misleading information in a professional setting. This may include manipulating financial records, hiding company losses, exaggerating performance results, or misleading customers and investors. Organizations or employees may justify dishonesty by claiming they are protecting the company, securing profits, or avoiding punishment. However, Kantian ethics argues that consequences do not determine morality. An action is wrong if it violates moral duty, even if it produces temporary benefits. For Kant, honesty is essential because trust and rational communication are necessary for society and professional relationships to function properly. The first formulation of the categorical imperative states act only according to that maxim which you can will to become universal law. This means we should ask whether it would be acceptable if everyone acted in the same way. In this case, the maxim could be it is acceptable to falsify information whenever it benefits the company or individual. If everyone followed this rule, workplaces would lose trust completely. Financial reports, contracts, and communication would become unreliable because nobody could believe the information provided. Business systems would collapse due to dishonesty. Kant argues that this creates a contradiction because falsification depends on people believing information to be true. Therefore, falsifying information cannot become a universal law and is morally wrong. At this point, it is useful to compare Kantian ethics with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism evaluates actions based on their outcomes and asks whether they create the greatest happiness for the greatest number. A utilitarian might argue that falsifying information is acceptable if it protects jobs, prevents panic, or temporarily saves a company from collapse. In other words, the consequences might appear beneficial in the short term. However, Kant strongly rejects this reasoning. According to Kant, Morality should never depend on consequences because consequences are uncertain and can change over time. Even if dishonesty creates temporary benefits, it still violates moral law and destroys trust. For Kant, truthfulness is a duty that must always be respected, regardless of outcomes. A major real world example is the Satyam Computer Services accounting scandal. In 2009, company chairman Ramalinga Raju admitted to falsifying financial statements and exaggerating company profits for years. Investors, employees, and stakeholders were deceived on a massive scale. When the fraud was exposed, investor confidence collapsed, financial losses increased, and India's corporate reputation suffered significantly. Thousands of employees faced uncertainty and instability. From a Kantian perspective, this scandal clearly violated the categorical imperative. Dishonesty was treated as acceptable for profit and reputation, which cannot be universalized. Additionally, stakeholders were treated merely as instruments for financial gain rather than as rational individuals deserving honesty and respect. The second formulation states that we must treat humanity always as an end and never merely as a means. When organizations falsify information, they manipulate employees, customers, and investors by denying them truthful information. These individuals are unable to make informed decisions because they are being deceived. For example, investors may lose money due to false financial reports, employees may unknowingly support unethical practices, and customers may trust products or services based on misleading claims. In each case, people are used merely as tools for profit or reputation. Kant believes this violates human dignity because every individual deserves honesty, respect, and the ability to make rational choices freely. A positive example of ethical leadership is the Johnson and Johnson Tylenol crisis in 1982. After cyanide poisoning incidents linked to Tylenol capsules, the company immediately warned the public and recalled products nationwide despite major financial losses. Instead of hiding information, the company prioritized customer safety and public trust. This demonstrated transparency, responsibility, and respect for human dignity. From a Kantian perspective, Johnson and Johnson treated customers as ends rather than merely as sources of profit. Their honesty strengthened long-term trust and showed that ethical leadership sometimes requires sacrifice and accountability. This example highlights how truthfulness and responsibility can strengthen organizational reputation and moral credibility. The third formulation asks us to act as if we are members of a kingdom of ends, a moral community where rational individuals create and follow universal ethical laws together. Kranak, 2019. Kant emphasizes the idea of co legislating, meaning rational people collectively decide moral principles for society. So we can ask, would rational professionals vote to legalize fraud and workplace dishonesty? Clearly, they would not. A workplace built on dishonesty would destroy cooperation, trust, and fairness. Ethical organizations require shared moral standards based on honesty and accountability. Therefore, falsifying information violates the kingdom of ends because it undermines the moral community necessary for professional and social life. Kantian ethics also teaches the importance of building ethical workplace cultures. Organizations should encourage transparency, accountability, and ethical leadership. Leaders play a major role because employees often follow the ethical standards set by management. Honest leadership builds trust, while dishonesty creates fear, instability, and corruption. Workplaces should also protect whistleblowers and ensure equal accountability so employees feel safe reporting unethical behavior. According to Kantian ethics, organizations have a responsibility to respect the dignity of all stakeholders and promote moral responsibility beyond profit and self interest. In conclusion, Kant's categorical imperative clearly demonstrates why falsifying information at work is morally wrong. Under the first formulation, dishonesty cannot become a universal law because trust would collapse. Under the second formulation, deception treats people merely as means instead of respecting their dignity. Under the third formulation, rational individuals in a moral community would never support workplace fraud. Although utilitarianism may sometimes justify dishonesty for beneficial outcomes, Kantian ethics insists that truthfulness and moral duty must always come first. Ethical workplaces depend on honesty, accountability, and respect for persons. Thank you for listening to my presentation. These are the academic sources and course materials used in this presentation, including Kant's Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, the course textbook by Matthews and Hendricks, and supporting readings on deontology and utilitarianism.